Alright, hello fellow wargamers, War 2 historians, and whoever else is out here tuning into this video. Welcome back to another tutorial series. I got a comment recently asking, well, how the heck do you actually set up the game through the Vassal engine and get all the pieces set up and actually have the board ready to go? So I figured let me make a tutorial for that, so let's jump right in. And so what I have right here is our Vassal engine, our Vassal engine website, vassalengine.org. I'll have all the links below. You want to, of course, download it. Depending on which computer you have, it should work for either one. There's different versions. Download the Vassal engine. The latest version is ideally the best version to have, and so that's very relevant for years down the road. If this video is still of any use to anybody, that they still are downloading the latest Vassal engine. It's a very old platform, so it still should work pretty well. Then we're going to go select our modules. And we're looking, of course, for that Eurofront module. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to select E here. And we're looking for Eurofront 2. I'm going to go down, down, down. Somewhere here on the bottom left, there it is, Eurofront 2 module. And then you want to download the latest version of that as well. And you can see here, the last date it was updated was 2013. So you should all be pretty fine when it comes to having the latest version, as far as I can tell. But if you're playing by email, you want to make sure that both you and your fellow player both have the same versions. So we downloaded the module and Vassal. We've installed the Vassal. So then let's open it up. And then what you're going to want to do is actually import the Eurofront 2 module. And there is instructions on the Vassal website on how to do that. You're going to import it. Then you're going to click open your Eurofront 2 module, and that's what I already did here. Boom, we're finally at this main menu, and you basically have three options for how to pick your games. And so they're pretty much all the same, but I can go into detail. A new game offline, pretty straightforward. You're playing basically by yourself. You can also select a game online. This is if you want to play live with another player. And that can work. I was able to meet some pretty interesting players this way, so definitely an option. The option that we're going to go with is the load saved game option. And so what I'm actually going to do is, instead of creating a new game from scratch, we're actually going to go into boardgamegeek.com and access a file that one of the people in the community was able to create that allows us to actually have the setups a lot easier. And so what we're going to do here is go on the website, boardgamegeek.com, excellent website for the game. Look up Eurofront, and then you're going to have to create an account in the boardgamegeek.com. So go ahead and do that, and then we're going to select files, and you're going to see that one of the most popular files in the community is this Vassal setup for Eurofront, created by gentleman by the name of Juan DeMarco, so big shout out to him. And then basically, you're going to download this. It's a zip file, and it basically allows you to play all the scenarios for both Eurofront, Westfront, and Eastfront all together into one nice package. So what we're going to do is download that zip file, open it up, and you can see here you have this long list of tables, or a long list of different scenarios that you can pick from. We have a bunch of Eastfront scenarios, you have a bunch of Eurofront scenarios, a few Westfront scenarios. The one I'm going to show you in this particular video is going to be the Summer 1941 Eastfront scenario. It is definitely my favorite. It is Operation Barbarossa, so let's go ahead and open that up. And let that load. And basically, once it's opened up, you all will see that the pieces are already available on the board, which is the main handy thing. And I guess I'll go ahead and also open up the scenario for 1941 as well. And so give you all a bit of a contrast for, to say, Eurofront the whole game. And so let it open up on my relatively load up. And I guess while that loads up, I can go ahead and show you from the rule books for setting up the scenarios. And so this is the, and you're going to see that it's a scenario, and there's some information line, and that the front line that you're going to set up. And the front line, of course, is the most important thing when it comes to these type of games. Front line is units. So that's the first thing, is simply being aware of. Then there's, if we have access to the right in the game, you're going to have the unit type that's being showed. It's also going to show you how many units of that unit type are available for the beginning of the scenario, and then it also shows you how many combat values are those units. So, for example, in the case of the Axis HQs, you have 5 HQs with a total of value points, right? And that's also going to include the Supreme, the regular field HQs. Other information that we have is reinforcements. You're going to see here that month, especially on the Axis side, is the main show for the invasion. Practically every month, the Axis are receiving a new core, and those arrive at certain locations. We can make another video on that, but basically they arrive at those reinforcement locations, and they are basically giving you free units throughout the campaign. You can also, they're until November of 1941, right around the Battle of Moscow. Other information on this page that we can gather is things like production, how much value of your air power, and also what's the handicap. This handicap is relevant for tournament scenarios. So if you want to get some kind of quantitative measure as to who won that campaign exactly, you can do this quick calculation, and you'd include a handicap. So, given the economic advantages that the Axis have, the developers have decided to add this handicap to sort of balance out the scenario somewhat. Then we also have the main ways to actually set up the forces in the game. Not all the scenarios, unfortunately, have this semi-historical deployment option, but this is the option that I'm going to show in this video. All the other scenarios are going to have this free deployment option, which basically says that you can deploy your units in any fashion with a few caveats. For example, in this one, there's still some constraints for the Soviets, telling you, which units need to go where for like their, basically their rear guard units. But as far as the main constraint that one needs to focus on is ensuring that all the frontline hexes are occupied. So that's basically that. Also, depending on who has the initiative in a particular scenario, you may have it so that, like in most war games, the player with the initiative gets to deploy second, while the defending player or the passive player gets to deploy first. It kind of gives the attacking player a little bit of leeway and allow them to set up their attacks. Of course, in the later scenarios, that role is reversed. So in this scenario, Soviets deploy second, but if we were to play a 1944 scenario, chances are the Axis are going to deploy first. The Soviets get to deploy second so that they can set up their attacks. And yeah, let's go ahead and actually take a look at the board itself. So up the right file. This is the Eastfront file. And so you'll notice that right now I only have access to the whole entire European map of the whole game. Right, and if you can look at the top left here, here's my map. You can only see that there's only about half of the map available. But if I were to open up a Eurofront, and then I were to open up that same little mini map, you'll see that the entire map of Europe. This is the full Eurofront. Wanted to play a campaign from summer 1941 onwards, and you wanted to do everything from Operation Barbarossa, and I think it was Battle Axe. The British launched a temporary counteroffensive right around the border of Egypt and Libya, or say later on. I want to say the Battle of El Alamein is not until 1942, but the point I'm trying to make is that you have access to the entire front, the entire theater of Europe in the Eurofront game. But I think for beginners, I recommend focusing more on the Eastern Front. It's somewhat from there. You would expand into the Western Front to explore some naval operation rules and eventually play the entire game altogether. So that's kind of where I am in my own journey. I'm still kind of picking up the naval rules and still exploring the full Eurofront game because there's some extra fronts there as well. So anyways, we have the entire East Front here available. Where are the units, you might be asking? Well, not to fear. Actual board game, you have the order of battle cards. Here in the Vassal engine, we have the setup sheet. And so the setup sheet is super useful. It's this extra tab that gives you the units already ready to go thanks to the community. And so I'm going to select the East Front Summer 41 tab here at the top. The units are actually, you have everything fronts or military districts is the way they called it. And then you also have the Axis Army groups, right? The Wehrmacht Army groups, Army Group North, Army Group Center, Army Group South, basically. And as well as Army Group Romania, part of Army Group South. This is Operation Barbarossa, basically. You also have a few satellite units, like some Hungarian, Romanian, and even Italian units. These units, of course, are not all available. It's on a few preconditions, but the point I'm trying to make is you have all the units for the scenario available in this game. What you do is basically transfer these units from this setup onto the map. And so, we'll start with, I think the Baltic front is the easiest. And you will notice, that on the map here on the left, there's this gray line that basically indicates the front line. And so you can notice that this gray line starts around Memel, goes on south, kind of goes around Bialystok, keeps going south near Brest-Litovsk. There's Warsaw to the left. Keep going south, keep going south. You cross over the Hungarian border, or Transylvania, and then it kind of goes to the Romanian region. There's Bessarabia, and that's basically the front. If we look back at the actual rule book, you can see that it matches this red line. So that's something to note. And another thing to note is that for this scenario, sector or the front is broken up into smaller sectors, and every sector is basically an army group. And so that's indicated by these little triangles. I'm going to zoom in so that you can see. Here's a red triangle that's going to basically differentiate the Baltic HQ or the Baltic Front or Baltic Military District from, say, the Western Front or Western Military District. I mean, any big World War II history fans will know that both of these armies were so large that they broke up the whole front into different sections. And so you can see another little gray triangle a little bit to the left of that. That's going to separate Army Group North from Army Group Center. And we keep going south. Here's another triangle that separates Army Group Center from Army Group South. This other red triangle would separate the Western Front from, say, the Southwestern Front, which was responsible for defending the Ukraine. And you keep going, and then finally have one extra front, which in this game I think they simply call it the Southern Front, where the Southwestern Front was called the Ukrainian Front. But there's another little red triangle. Now, as far as actually setting up the units, the way it works for the semi-historical is that you don't need to place them exactly on those areas. You actually can put them in one area on or adjacent to the designated area. So I'm going to show that with a Baltic HQ. So it takes, for example, this Soviet HQ here at Riga. I actually don't need to place it directly on Riga. I could actually place it around Riga. And so there's a little bit of that fog of war element. You have some sense of as to how your opponent's going to set up their units, but you're not 100% how that's going to look. So, here's another Riga unit. I can put one there. I can put this other unit right over here. And I can always mismatch this combination. If I stack them all in Riga, option, but I don't have to. So the rule of thumb is basically you want to have one unit on or adjacent to all of those different hexes. And then, of course, there is the German setup. And maybe I should go ahead and actually do the whole setup just for the sake of people actually getting to see the whole video. It's going to take a little bit longer, but I say let's go ahead and do it. I'm going to try to do it as quickly as I can, so hopefully, it's not too tedious of a video. But at the end of the day, this is wargaming, so it does take time to set up some of these scenarios. So I'm going to do my best to set it up as historically as possible, just from memory, because I've been so fascinated that I've been spending a lot of time just kind of studying this. But yeah, I'm just going to move these units around. I think this unit may go around here, something like that. Well, actually, no, this unit needs to be near the front. But basically what I'm doing for the Western Front, you can see that there's a few units that need to be around Minsk. And so I put the Western Front HQ around Minsk. These other two units, the 13th Army is going to be on Minsk. 4th Guard unit is actually going to be like the 4th Mech Corps. There was no Guard units in 1941. But the developers used a crafty way to combine, the standard Soviet units to their Guard units later on, putting it adjacent to Minsk. That's the main takeaway. Finished setting up some of the units for the Baltic Front. That's kind of their second echelon. But you can see that there's other units that say front, so I want to place these. And the rule of thumb for any of whether you do this or if you do the free deployment, you want to make sure that both sides have all the frontline hexes occupied. If I haven't said that already, that's like the main caveat, or the main rule of thumb to keep in mind. So then finally, in this case, the game calls it the Ukrainian front. So here's Ternopil. I'll put one unit there. The Ukrainian HQ there. I'll put another one. The 37th, I believe it's the 37th Rifle Corps. I'm going to put it there. Here's 37th Army, but again, it's just being crafty. Put the cavalry unit in the rear. Maybe we'll put it near Rovny or on Rovny. Here's Kyiv. Put another unit. This is part of the big Soviet reserves. I'll put one unit at Kyiv. The other one is Zhytomyr, adjacent to Kyiv, so that's okay. And then let's see here. The 5th Army, I think, is a little north. 6th Army is around Lvov. 26th Army is going to be that, basically. And then we have a bunch of these Soviet corps. The 12th Army is south, so I'll put it here. Also note that in this scenario, Hungary is neutral. Hungary is neutral. You actually don't have to worry about putting a unit in this one hex here, since it's not technically part of the front line. And then we just have 3 more units to place. I'm going to put a 4th Mech Corps there, or cluster of Mech Corps there. I'll put the 8th there as well. And then the 9th, I'm going to set an LT. And then that basically covers the region from one triangle to the other, covering the entire Ukrainian. And then we also have, let's see, they call it the Odessa Military District, aka Southwestern Front, or I think it's called the Southern Front rather. And so we'll put this HQ on Vinnytsia. The 7th Corps can be southwest of that. This amphibious unit, Soviet amphibious unit, we'll put around Odessa. And we basically have 4 more units, and we can place them all at the front in any order. Here, 2nd Mech Corps there. 18th Army can go further south. Cavalry right over here. So boom, that's the Soviet setup. And there's a few more units to set up. We have the Leningrad district, which is very far away from the front, at least from the German army, but it is near the Finnish border. And so for the game, this border is inactive, but if you were to play Eurofront, you can actually include the, which is pretty neat. And then what else? Here is the strategic reserve. I'm going to go ahead and set it up. I believe that these units aren't active in the Eurofront game, but for the sake of the Eastern Front game, we'll go ahead and set these units up There's two types of reserves for the Soviets. Soviets have a few units around Moscow. Again, they don't have to be directly on Moscow. I can put them, adjacent to Moscow. We'll put them a little west for faster deployments, if at all possible. Doesn't make too much of a difference. Vitebsk, another unit near Vitebsk, unit near Smolensk. I'll put it in Mogilev. If you don't see that, here's Smolensk over there. And then Gomel, same thing. This is basically the Soviets' kind of reserve group that played a big part in the Battle of Smolensk later on in Barbarossa. I'll put it near Cherkasy. We'll keep it near Kiev, actually. And then near Gomel, we'll put it actually on Gomel itself. How about that? And then, of course, I can go ahead and set up the reserve armies. The only units that I wouldn't actually set up on this game are the reinforcements, since they're not available until November. And then there's a few others that arrive in December, April, May, June, July 1942. So there you go. That's the Soviet setup. You can see that the Soviets are pretty, a lot of their units are kind of far back from the front line. One of the big arguments for why they were so unprepared for the was that a lot of the units were simply too far back. So it's a very complicated story, but so I'm going to go ahead and now set up the German side. The Germans were a lot easier to set up, in my opinion, especially in these early scenarios, because the Germans just have a huge stack of troops. I can just kind of stack up all these infantry and just place them at the front line. I mean, Army Group North only occupies 2 frontline hexes, for example. Boom, that's easy. OKH, I'm going to put out Warsaw. Army Group Center, the HQ, I'll just leave it there. And then I like to stack up the armored units into clusters. So I'm kind of deviating from the historical accuracy here. But for the sake of semi-historical accuracy, it's pretty consistent. And also keep in mind that, a lot of these units can move 2 to 3 hexes on the first move, so it's not too much of an issue. But I will argue that the first opening attack on the German side is super critical for Barbarossa. And so I have 2 extra units, for example, here. I can actually put them a little bit south of this gray triangle, so you don't have to worry about it being 100% exact. Again, it's on or adjacent to the hexes, so I can actually have some Army Group Center and Army Group South overlap one another. So that's an important thing to note there as well. We have Army Group South. I'll, put the Southern HQ. Yeah, we'll put it here. Stacking up their armor and just stacking up the infantry and just placing all these units on the front. Pretty straightforward. And if you want to be a super stickler about it, you can really spend touring around with getting it historically 100% accurate. It's really, I find it quite educational, frankly. Finally, we have the Army Group Romania, which is technically part of Army Group South. So we'll put the German cluster north and a few Romanian units, and we can put these here, in Romanian territory. And again, you want to have all the frontline hexes occupied, so we've satisfied that. I'm going to pretty much leave it at that. I'm not going to go ahead and set up the Hungarian units available until July 1941, when they enter the war, when they basically enter the war, declare war on the Soviets. I believe that's what happened historically. And I'm not going to set up the Bulgarian units, although I guess I could. I mean, it's only 2 units, right? Boom, boom. Okay, and then all the other units basically that you see here are units that are going to be the reinforcements, and I should probably set up the Soviet reserve armies right now, but the video. The last thing I want to show is how the fog of war can be activated. As I mentioned in previous videos, the by this white silhouette that you can see around your units. Before I actually do that, though, there is one little bug in Vassal engine, and unfortunately, you have to do this every time you open up the Vassal engine. But this is very relevant when you play by email. But what I'm going to do and then from there, I'm going to basically unselect. Opponents can unmask my pieces. So I'm going to click OK. Do it again, file preferences, reselected option, click OK a second time, and basically what that will allow is to hide these units, which I can then do by right-clicking and then hiding these units. Basically what happens is that now, when I makes it a lot easier, it allows my opponent to unmask specific battles, which just makes the gameplay a lot smoother when you play by email. I'm basically selecting just the short key, and I'm hiding all these units now. Now you can see that they have this white silhouette around them. If I were to switch to another player, which I can do here, switch to another player, now you can see that all these units are now they've turned black and they're hidden. But if I right-click them, I can basically hide these units and see them again. So that's just helpful for when you. And I'm going to do the same thing for the Soviets, for this other player. All I did, by the way, is just add a little password, and I don't matter what the password is, but I just my name is the same, but just password change is enough for you for Vassal to recognize that you've changed the user basically, and that it technically is another player. So that's what I do when I do my solo plays, or when I play with a friend. Obviously we have two different accounts. But now I'm going to do the same thing. Go to Preferences, go to General, unselect, click OK. File, Preferences, reselect Opponents can unmask my pieces. Click OK again. And now that should also apply. So I'm going to hide all these units. Control H, Control H, Control H. All these different units. And so now these units are visible for one player, right? For the Soviet player, but they're going to be invisible for the Axis player, and then vice versa. A few more units to hide here, and then we'll hide the Moscow units, and then I guess I can hide these reinforcements, and also the reserve armies. And so all these units are visible to the Soviet player, invisible to the German player, right? So if I go back, and now I switch back to the Axis player, now you'll see that the Soviets are now all red. And so basically, if I were to start a sequence, I can start the log file, click begin log file, and I would actually start my sequence and launch my attacks, right? And I'm, deploying all my, similar to the last video, except on a much, much larger scale. I did a little bit of a you can check that out, just how the turn turns out. But I'm launching multiple attacks, right? I guess I should have deployed the HQ in advance. And basically, when I'm ready to do a battle, I can actually unhide the Soviet player and do the battle there. So obviously, there's a kind of a what would you call it? You obviously trust the person you're playing with enough so that they don't simply unhide all your units, because that would kind of defeat the purpose of the game. But you can at least the individual battles that you want to launch your attacks on, and that's really